Well, it's thrilling to be here. All right, so how many people actually came because they wanted to hear about how you sleep your way to the top? Did anybody, was that actually the reason why you're here? All right, we have one. Okay. We will talk about this. Well, first of all, thanks for coming tonight. Gosh, what a great crowd, and especially in this weather. I am such a weather weenie. If any sign of rain or snow, I immediately cancel whatever I was going to do. So I really appreciate it. I'll try to make this as engaging as possible. I thought what I would do to start, though, although Keith gave a little bit of my background, sometimes from talking to Molly and Vic and others, that it's maybe helps to understand just maybe a little bit more about it. And my style is super informal. I don't have a really long presentation. So if there's questions as we go through it or thoughts or whatever, please feel free to have a dialogue. So what I wanted to do to start with was just kind of show you a little bit about my path. What I don't have on here is I'm from Peoria, Illinois, and I go all the way back there because a lot of what I do today is framed up from where I came from. My mother got pregnant with me when she was a teenager, and I was the oldest of 4 kids, which is, you know, maybe not too unusual in the world, but maybe what's a little bit tougher was when I was a young teenager and my twin brothers were, they're 10 years younger than me, were about 3 years old. My father left us for his girlfriend. And for those of us that grew up in the 70s, you may recall that you could actually be a deadbeat dad back then, which you can't do now. And so my dad left us. And my mother, who had gotten pregnant with me when she was a girl, had never had a job and didn't have any more than a high school education. And so all of a sudden, she was in a situation where she had no money because my dad was gone, no skills because she'd never worked, and had to take care of 4 kids. And it really framed up a lot of, I think, who I've become as a young woman and now as a more experienced woman in terms of being in that environment and sort of seeing what it was like. So maybe some of you have had the same experience, but when you are, you know, in your early 30s like she was with 4 kids, the kind of things that you do is you are a school bus driver. You are the gal that is running, answering the 911 calls from 11 o'clock to 7 in the morning, and you go from there to cleaning bedpans at the nursing home. And that really was my mother's background for a really long time. And I think for me, what it really helped me see was that an education was the key way to really change my circumstance. And so I was very, very fortunate. I think a lot of girls who would have been in that situation would have had a mom that would have said, stay home and help me with the boys so that we can all, because I had a job and was supporting that. But my mother was very much the person who said, do not live the same life that I'm living, and the secret to that is really an education. So I was fortunate enough to go to Knox College, which is a liberal arts school in Illinois, on a pretty much a full financial scholarship, which was really lucky. Vic and I were talking about this earlier, about the burden that a lot of young people have today about going on to college and how scary that is and how expensive it is. And I would say, honestly, if I wouldn't have been so poor and wouldn't have been able to get financial aid, I might not have gone to college myself. And so when I talk a little bit about what I do today, I work a lot at the University of Colorado and have just actually just recently announced 4 scholarships to help young people that are coming in to the University of Colorado who are the first in their family to go to college. So it's something very important. I went from there on to get my MBA. So in my liberal arts, I was a Russian major undergraduate. Keith was probably too embarrassed to, he mentioned I had an MBA, but I think he left out that I was a Russian major because it might scare everybody in the room about what I was going to be talking about. But the reason why I studied Russian was, and there's probably a lot of different liberal arts backgrounds here, was I was good at languages. I knew French and German, and I had been an exchange student to Turkey. And my whole thing coming up in the background that I came up with was I wanted to be rich. That was like the key thing in my life was, it's like kind of was like a Scarlett O'Hara thing, I will never be poor again. And so I wanted to get good grades in school so I could go to law school, because law school was really, I thought that, I didn't know anything about lawyers because I never knew a lawyer, but I knew that lawyers were rich. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do. So I've got an undergraduate degree in Russian. I worked for a year, moved down to Dallas, Texas, and worked for a year. And during the course of that year, well, might imagine, anybody lived in Dallas before? I know Neil has. So in Dallas, Texas in 1981, no one had actually heard about Russia, let alone that anyone had studied Russian. So when I showed up, and then there was this other little factor that I have to share, which is because I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and lawyers were rich, and rich lawyers had secretaries, I never learned how to type. Now, you say that sounds like absolutely crazy, but so I show up with a Russian major, no typing skills, and need to get a job. So luckily, I got a job at a bank as the gal at like one of these little local banks that when you walk in, you need to see someone who's got like the friendly face that sends you over to the loan officer or, over, to the teller. And I was that girl, and I was making $5 an hour, and I was damn proud of it. But it really wasn't enough to support me, so I also worked at night at Lord & Taylor in the men's department selling ties. And you're probably like, this is, if I'm going to do my whole career this long, we're going to be here for like 2 days. So I promise I'm going to like pick it up. But it's just so important to get that first part because so much, again, what happened to me as a young girl sort of framed everything else. So in the course of the year before I was going to go into law school, I was working in this bank, and I ended up taking the LSAT and the GMAT. And as luck would have it, I did mediocre on the LSAT, and I totally scored on the GMAT. And so I never really thought about business before, but what happened also at the time was that Zales Corporation, everybody know they're like kind of like Jared the Diamond people, the national company. That particular year, in that particular time, they were giving a full scholarship to someone who had retail background to get their MBA at SMU. And I had just spent the last year selling ties in the men department at Lord & Taylor, which qualified as retail experience. So the question I had was, do I go on to be a rich lawyer and pay for 3 years of schooling, or do I go immediately and get my MBA, which is fully paid for? And even though I hadn't taken a business class, I went with the MBA choice, which is why I have my MBA from SMU. So now I'll really make it go fast. So that was kind of the foundation. I started my career at Frito-Lay in Dallas. It was a division of PepsiCo. I moved up to Pepsi. As Keith said, I rose to the level of a division president. I was the first woman president at Frito. I went from there to run the Ora Wheat business. This is Best Foods. I think probably everybody who's probably had Ora Wheat. So I was Ora Wheat and Thomas English Muffins and the Intamin's business. Did that. Oh, I left out Gateway in between. I have a year in my life that I like try to forget about, which is when I left the food business, or I know there's probably a lot of technology people here. I am not one of you. I am sorry. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is nut butter, bread, and agave, and that's about as sophisticated as it's going to get. But I went to Gateway for a year, and they weren't my peeps. That's all I'm going to say. So I went from Gateway, then I ran the Ora Wheat business, which was a great experience to get back in the food business. From there, I was telling the story a little bit earlier. I don't actually have on this career path, but right when that business was actually sold, my husband at the time was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that's when we actually moved to Colorado. And he was diagnosed in October, and he died in July. And we were here, and after he passed away, I was after having had pretty good 20-some-year career in the corporate world. I decided that what I wanted to do was not be like a corporate person. I wanted to really give back, and that I had what I thought were pretty good skills in terms of working with others and facilitative stuff. And so I decided to go to Regis and get a master's degree in counseling. So this was going to be how I was going to kind of change the world. And so,
did the loss of your husband kind of change, help spur that change?
It totally did, because he was 49 at the time, and when something like that, if anyone has gone through something like that, all of a sudden, everything feels so meaningless. Like, oh my gosh, he's, life is short, and what do you want to do that's, really important? And so I went to Regis because I was going to get a master's in counseling, and thought that would sort of be my way. And so I got into the second semester. And is your name Chris? Did you say? So Chris is going to be my role play partner that I had at Regis. And so Chris is playing a drug addict, and I'm his counselor. Now, I know most of you don't know Chris because it's his first time here. I don't think he's a drug addict, but in this particular situation, he's playing a drug addict. And so Chris is telling me about what his problem is. I'm in my second semester, and I'm listening to Chris, and he's telling me about his situation. I'm like, Chris, stop taking drugs. I mean, it just seems so clear to me. What was the deal about this, So anyway, so at that moment, I knew that counseling was not going to be where I should be. So I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity. So I thought, well, at this point in time, what do I want to do? If I'm going to go back and make money, which I think that's the thing I'm good at, not counseling, obviously, what should I do with my time? And so I'd never had any international experience. So I actually had the opportunity to go to Heinz. At the time, Heinz was about 65% was outside of the U.S., and I was the chief growth officer, which was kind of a funky name for the person who was in charge of global sales and marketing. But it was so awesome, and it was kind of one of those things, and if anyone's had this in your career, where it's on the, if you think about a career, it doesn't go like this at all, right? It goes like this, and maybe sometimes like this, and then maybe like that. And for me, on paper, this looked like because I'd had some big responsibility, and it didn't look like it was that big of a job. But I wanted to get international experience, and so I went to Heinz and did that, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my career, because in that role of sort of this global sales and marketing person, I was spending time in Australia and in China, in Italy, and in London. And from that, I ended up getting promoted to run the London business for Heinz, and that was the UK and Ireland, and it was a pretty big business at the time. From that, I came back to the U.S., and I was, as Keith said, I was part of a team that got Hostess out of bankruptcy. Does anybody like Twinkies or Ding Dongs here? You are welcome. Thank you. Send me. So I went from there, and I got recruited. Probably everybody knows Rudy's Organic Bakery, though, right? So Rudy's has been around since 1976. At the time when I was asked to come in and run it, it had been owned by a private equity firm that had had a buildup of bakeries, and the buildup was losing a lot of money. And because of some of my other previous experience running the Oro Wheat business and also being with Hostess, I was kind of an ideal candidate. And I happened to have a house here, because remember when I was at Regis, I had a house here in town. I never sold it when I moved on to do other things. So that was kind of my story. So this is actually up till last year. So we did that last 29 years, like really, really fast. So until a year ago, I was running Rudy's, based in Boulder. It's a national company. It was bought by Hain Celestial just about a year ago. So what have I been doing for the last year? I have been spending a tremendous amount of time doing mentoring with young people and with entrepreneurs. It's really kind of my passion and where I spend a lot of time. I did write a book that was published in May of last year, and I'll tell you why I named it this in a second, because I know you're dying to get to that last chapter where I talk about sleeping with somebody. But what I'm doing today, today I've kind of got a bunch of stuff going on. Let me start over on the right. So I'm a board member at a number of organizations. Most of these are, I don't know if you can maybe see all this stuff. 2 are nonprofit. I'm on the board of the Lead School at the University of Colorado. It's the business school. I'm on the board of the Unreasonable Institute, which is an accelerator. Has anybody ever heard of Unreasonable Institute? So it's an accelerator for social impact companies from around the world that come into Boulder for kind of an intensive 6-week time frame, and then they go back out and really change the world. So it's about solving water problems and food problems and light problems and just kind of anything that you might imagine. So I've been on the board of that. And then I'm on a number of food companies, Justin's Nut Butter, that I'm going to talk about, Mudhava, which I'm going to talk about, El Dorado Springs Waterman, you might know that's been around since 1983 here. It's another wonderful company, and then a couple of other things. And then my most recent news that even my financial planner who's here doesn't know about is I'm joining a company called ProYo. It's based in Santa Barbara, and it's I know.
That's why.
I know. Woe is me. I'm going to actually stay in Colorado, so for anyone who wants to stay in touch, I'm just going to be commuting. But it's a really early stage startup. For those of you that have started, I went from big company to Rudy's, which was like a $100 million business. I've done a lot of consulting with not consulting, but more mentoring for smaller companies. And this is like something that's got a couple $100,000 in sales. But it'll be coming to a King Soopers near you this summer. And I'll have you check it. It's a superfood. I mean, it is a frozen yogurt in a tube. And the thing that got me so excited about it is it's got 20 grams of protein and probiotics in 4 ounces. And for anybody here who works out a lot and takes a lot of protein, 20 grams of protein in 4 ounces is really hard to deliver on, and this stuff tastes like Haagen-Dazs. So it is not 20 ounces of something that you can barely get down and you need to before you go work out. So it's pretty exciting, and so I'm really kind of thrilled to be in that space. I also have a career advice website that I launched about 2 years ago. If you have a chance to look at it, it's called janeknows.com. And this is sort of just kind of a little carousel here, kind of like Netflix, where you can go across and pick a topic from things like horrible bosses to things that suck, to office politics. Kind of my sort of speciality after all these years is talking about the things that nobody really wants to talk about. So it isn't about learning technical skills, it's about learning how to deal with more difficult people, which leads me to my book. The reason why I wrote a book was because what I was finding in all my mentoring with both young people and also with entrepreneurs was that the same themes were coming up all the time. That so many of the issues that people were having was not about technical skills or things in terms of things you get in a degree, but it's like, how do you interact with people? What do you do with that really bad boss? What do you do when someone's undermining you in the workplace? What do you do when you are trying to be professional and look for a job? I mean, all that stuff that you learn, like when you've been around for a long time, but when you're new into the workforce and you kind of are leaving college in many cases and going out, it's scary as heck. And so that's why I wanted to put it all in one place. So why did I give it the title, Sleep Your Way to the Top and Other Myths About Business Success? So you have to really read the subtitle. It's Other Myths About Business Success. It isn't about sleeping your way to the top. So don't anybody leave, because I know really more of you came just to see the book. So, so what happened to me in my career early on was I had started in marketing at Frito-Lay and had a pretty successful career. And I made a decision to move into what was called a field job, and this would be a general management job that would have a plant underneath me, the guys that drive the Frito trucks that deliver the chips to the store, so it was very much an operational job. And up until that point, there had not been anyone from marketing and no women from marketing that had been in that job. And so there'd been one woman who'd been around for a really long time, but nobody that sort of had come from marketing and was kind of my generation. And when I got the job, the rumor went around that I must have slept with somebody to get the job, that there's no way that based on my skills I could have got that. And so, I'm a pretty confident woman now, but I was pretty confident back then. And when that rumor went out, I have to say it was really debilitating, because to think that I had done what I thought were sort of all the right things to have a successful career and then have it sort of undermined very quickly with kind of a rumor. Now, what I'll tell you is, stop whining, get over it. But it kind of always stayed in the back of my mind that the importance of confidence and how many things that happen in somebody's career that can easily derail you, and things that could take someone who had had a successful track record and felt pretty good about herself and really question what my skills were. So I kind of always kept that in the back of my mind. So when I wrote this book, if you have a chance to get it or to give it to someone, it's about 38 chapters that are all based on a myth. And like you can sleep your way to the top. And so the book is funny, but it's also kind of filled with practical advice, because that's sort of how how I approach it. So it's funny and practical. So on Amazon you can get paperback, hardback, Kindle version, or even better, 5.5 hours of listening to this voice do this book. So when you leave here and when you're dying to get the book, don't skimp. It's only like $17, and you can listen to me in your car, in your commute, and get all the great advice that I've got. So anyway, okay, so that's my whole story. Now let's talk about the topic for tonight. About how do we really invigorate and vitalize entrepreneurial spirit in small companies. So I want to start with this kind of framework, and I know many of you are entrepreneurs, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Can you see this okay in the back? Is it all right? So when I talk to entrepreneurs, what I love about entrepreneurs are that we generally start with the idea that you want to do something that you're great at and something that you love. And most of us who are starting a company, like me just talking about my frozen yogurt thing, believe that we're doing something that's going to change the world. Yes, 20 grams of protein in a 4-ounce tube is going to change the world. And I want you guys to know that right now, because when it happens, you heard it here first. And then finally, you get around to, gosh, maybe I'll get paid for this too, because I'm doing something I love, and it's something that I'm good at, and it's something that's going to change the world. And sort of kind of in the sweet spot of all that is the purpose of which I think entrepreneurs decide to start jobs. So why did I start with this? Is to kind of frame up, in big companies, we don't do that very well. We don't really create that environment where generally what I found in big companies is you have this one here, but you don't have the rest of them, which really kind of sucks, right? Because most of us are really driven by the other stuff, and then we want to have, other than me who wanted to be rich when I was younger, but you really want to have, I think in the ideal world, kind of all these things. So I start with that sort of framing up this kind of desire for all of us to do something that we love, and to be able to do something that we get paid for, and to do something that we're great at and will change the world. So how do you get it? I'm going to share 3 case studies, and these are very, very short, and this is the food business, so this isn't rocket science kind of stuff. So if anybody is not too overwhelmed with my big analysis here, sorry. But I'm going to talk about 3 different companies. Mudhava Sweeteners, which has been around since 1973, and I'm on the board. So all these companies I know very well because I've either run or I'm on the board. Rudy's, as you know, I ran until last year, and it was established in 1976. And Justin's Nut Butter was established in 2003. So does everybody knows Rudy's. Have you heard about Mudhava? It's an agave company. I'll talk about that in a second. And how about Justin's Nut Butter? Yeah. How about their candy? Has anybody had the peanut butter cups? Yeah, I know I should have brought some of those, Molly. You should have had me do that. All right, so let me start with Mudhava. With each one of these, I'm just going to give you a short situation analysis, and then I'm going to talk about some of the key things that happen in these highly established companies that really created an entrepreneurial spirit and really brought a lot of growth. And I have about 3 slides a piece, so this isn't super long. But so the situation with Mudhava is this. They're the category leader in natural sweeteners, but their main piece of business is agave syrup, and it's a commodity, and it's declining. So there's a lot of reasons for the fact there's a lot of stuff out there about agave, but it is a commodity. And what's interesting about this is it's actually the key ingredient, in tequila. And tequila was actually the Chinese, you want some tequila? I didn't bring any tequila, and I didn't bring any, gosh, all right, next time, if you guys have me back, I will bring some.
Keep going, is it the supply or the demand of the agave that's declining?
So what's interesting is in the U.S., agave as a sweetener is declining, but actually the world demand for it is increasing because a country just like China just allowed tequila to be sold there. And so it's like the weirdest thing, which is that it's a commodity, and so it's more expensive now than ever, but people are using it less than ever. So it's actually a very weird supply and demand kind of thing. So her issue is Debbie Carosella, who runs this business. Her issue is she's the leader of a category that's declining. So if you've ever been in that situation, you go, well, that's no good. So what did she do? The first thing she did was this. She really looked at, although agave is declining overall, what is really growing is honey. And again, this is the food business, so again, I'm not going to share any big secrets here with you that you'll be surprised about. But honey is like off the rails growth right now. It's really, really interesting. And so even though Mudhava has been really known as an agave company, the first thing that she did sort of within the company to sort of get people excited about how to kind of grow the business is say, let's focus on areas that we can really own and that are not necessarily in our sweet spot. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So the first thing she did was, okay, all right, even though this is like, 80% of the business when she gets the business, let's try to understand what else is happening out there. And again, in many of, whether you're in tech or healthcare, whatever business you might be in, this is, a key thing to look at. If you're mainly in an area that's declining, how do you figure out the thing that's growing? So this is the first thing that she did. The second thing that she did was to say, now how do we think sort of even outside of the box a little bit more? I mean, honey seems kind of obvious because they're in the honey business, so we kind of go from, focusing on agave to trying to sell more honey. But how do we get into categories that we can really take our brand and sort of expand it into something that is bigger than what we've got currently? And so what she did is there's actually a couple of really interesting new products here using agave. She's got some baking mix products. If you ever have a chance to try these, you can get them at Whole Foods. They're really like super amazing, delicious products. So she's got chocolate chip and some brownie mixes and that kind of stuff. But what she said was, let's, okay, so if we're going to let's do honey, right? That makes a little bit of sense. But how do we look and see if Mudhava as an ingredient can actually be a bigger, broader brand idea? And so really tried a bunch of different things. We've got some baking mixes, some syrups for pancakes. She's got some mixes with agave for like a crystal light kind of thing. So really kind of said, let's start to look at other categories and try things. And so from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if you're in the food business, it's super exciting as a marketing person or salesperson to try to get into new categories. It's something that really brings the organization to sort of thinking about things in a new way, and so Debbie did that. And the final thing that I think she did really well was to really start to help consumers understand how you can use these products in other things that you're using sort of in your life. And so again, from an innovation standpoint, it's not just here's a bottle of agave, but let's start to think about how we really kind of get people to kind of feast their eyes on ways that you can use these products. So as she has, and I'll give you the business results at the end of the 3 companies I'm going to talk about. So when you think about what she did was focus, new products, and then really try to talk to the consumer in a way that was super compelling to them. The Rudy story is a little different with a couple similarities. So when I came into Rudy's, we were an organic bread business. And at the time, what was happening was there was a massive growth of gluten-free. And anybody here a celiac or eat gluten-free products? Well, that's really kind of a small percentage. Usually there's a bigger group of people. And so when I came into the business in 2008, the bread business was pretty much flat. But what we saw was that gluten-free was growing like crazy at the time. And since most of you are not gluten-free, you probably wouldn't know that the bread products at the time were almost inedible. And if you had a kid that was a celiac, it was like heartbreaking, because you couldn't really make any kind of a sandwich that wasn't something that was so terrible that they really wouldn't want to eat. And so part of our mission then was to figure out how do we go from being just an organic business to take advantage of this gluten-free trend. And so what we did was we went from kind of our organic wheat business, we had a huge line of products with this item being our number one, and said we needed to create a loaf of bread that tasted like a real loaf of bread. And this took us a year and a half, which might sound really surprising. Like isn't this like easy to sort of put this stuff together? Like to get a product that like tastes good, that actually was gluten-free, took us a year and a half before we came out, because we had a couple things that were super important to us. Like we couldn't just come out with a gluten-free bread that was crappy. It needed to be something that was, if it was going to be in the Rudy's name, which is I think some of the best breads ever, that it was going to need to be sort of in that same kind of area. So the first thing that we did was to make sure that we focused on a category that was growing, that we weren't in. And strategically, this was a super big decision for us because we were Rudy's organic bakery. And when we actually did the research and tried to put together an organic gluten-free product, we would have to sell that for like $10 or $11 a loaf. And so we did, and again, for anybody who's had strategic decisions with your business, you kind of go, how big of a deal is that? It's a pretty big deal, because what happened was in the hierarchy of, I don't know if you'd agree with this, gluten-free is the number one thing because you can't eat gluten. The next thing that you would want to have would be taste. The next thing you'd want to have under that would be price. And then organic was like someplace that you wouldn't even know where it was at, because you wouldn't even think about that because you could never get the first 3 things together. So our big strategic decision, and the thing that really was a game changer for our business, was to say that we were going to come out with an all-natural gluten-free product, and that really revolutionized our business. The second thing that we did when I came in was, this is my team over here, and I have a really bad haircut there, so please don't pay attention to that, is really having the right team. If you think about any challenges about unleashing an entrepreneurial spirit in an organization, it needs to come from the top. And people need to be able to support failures and let people take chances and believe that you can do stuff. And when I came into this job, it was a really difficult thing, because the team that was there, actually, many of them had worked for me at Orowheat before, many years before when I ran that business, and they had come over here. And so when I came in, they're like, wow, this is great, Jane's showed up, because we worked for her before. And as I kind of met with each person on the senior team and said, what do you think about this business? To a man, sorry, they were all men, said, bread business really isn't going to grow. It's, maybe 1% to 2% a year. How can you have a team that's supposed to grow the business if your senior team only believes they can grow 1% to 2% a year? You're not going to grow your business any more than 1% to 2% a year. So for anybody here, making sure that if you believe that you want to have entrepreneurship, that you want to really create a vital business, please make sure that your team believes that too. Because if you're the only one, will not be successful. Yeah?
What year was it that you were catching the beginning of the gluten-free wave?
So we were I came in 2008. We immediately started working on the product. Udi's, which is a local competitor and was really just local at the time, had just come out with their product. So we introduced our first gluten-free product in the fall of 2010. So that was kind of the sort of the timing on that. And if you go back in history, which again, that's only a couple of years ago, but the gluten-free product quality has changed dramatically over the last, across like every category. And I feel like that we were really great at that. So when you kind of think about entrepreneurship and trying to get people to do great stuff in your organization, make sure your senior team is there. And so I pulled together a really great team of people that believed that we could grow more than 1% a year. And I'll show you the results in a second. And the other is to have the right incentives too. You know, I mean, people want to, yeah.
When you said you pulled them together, did you change them or did you get rid of them?
So it was a combination. It was a combination. And the hardest, I would say probably the hardest part of my career ever, you know, for anybody who's ever had to fire anybody, that is hard. If you have to fire somebody you know that used to work for you, I don't think there's any kind of worse hell in the corporate world than that. But fundamentally, we couldn't have people that didn't believe in growing the business. It's just they weren't going to be part of it. So there was kind of a combination. A couple of these people were actually stayed and with the journey with us, but I replaced a couple people too. But at the end of the day, kind of this team that was here, everybody there believed that we could do what we did, and again, I'll share the results in a second. So, but it's tough. It's really, really tough because you know you care about people, and there's nothing worse than having to fire somebody. But at the end of the day, if you're not aligned on what your objectives are, then, and of course everybody's treated with respect and all that in terms of leaving the organization. So the other part was creating right incentives. So I mean, you know, it's like little things. Like we had like the worst parking lot in the world at our bakery. And so, you know, you had to park way down the street or around the corner or whatever. And so we literally put right in front of the front door an employee of the month parking spot. And we which again, doesn't cost the organization anything, doesn't sound like it's a big deal. It was like high-fiving in the halls, and people were always trying to get that. And then we did other incentives too, and you know, obviously bonus structures and stuff. But it's kind of the little stuff that you think about if you want people to come up with ideas and get excited about the organization. And the final thing that we did at Rudy's was we created some really compelling programming online. And I'm still amazed to this day. When I left last year, we had about 250,000 Facebook followers following bread. Right? I mean, think about that for a second. Like, who follows bread? You know? But the reason, and this was just, you know, the gluten-free bread. But what we did was we created a community behind it where people felt that they were part of something that was bigger than them. And so again, there's probably nothing more basic than the bread business. And I think if you can really think about getting that many people to get excited about it, that, you know, I think we did a couple things right. My final case study here is with Justin's. Now here's their situation, and remember they started in 2003, and Justin started in his garage, sort of, you know, mixing this stuff up. His brand has been growing like crazy. So nut butters, he was expanding across the country. You know, he's an almond butter, and he's got hazelnut butter. He's got some peanut butter too, and he's you know, had this line of nut butters that you can buy, and it's about 2 to 3 times more expensive than Skippy or Jif if you are sort of in that category. But he's growing like crazy. But we're kind of looking at the business and saying, so how do we leverage the equity while at the same time enhancing the margins? And that's when he came up with the peanut butter cups, which are a really high margin item, a real high velocity item. So the first thing that he did was develop these. And these are, and he's actually, I don't have a picture in here, but he's actually just coming out with minis pretty soon, and they are even better than these. They have a higher proportion of chocolate to peanut butter. So just to let you know that they're coming, and you're going to love them. So this actually, so Justin's today is looking much more like a candy business than a nut butter business because he really tried to stretch the brand. And the next thing he did, this is actually in the Santa Barbara Starbucks. While I was there, I took a picture of it. He just got authorized into all 7,000 Starbucks across the U.S., which is you wouldn't find a jar of almond butter at Starbucks, but you're going to find his dark chocolate peanut butter things. And so you think about kind of revolutionizing a business. Under his old business, he wouldn't have had anything that he could sell in these kind of alternate customers. In his new business, it opened up a lot of other stuff. And the final thing I'll tell you about Justin is, you probably can't read this, but this is like the coolest thing ever, and you should check this out on his site. What happened? Anybody know who John Mayer is? Who's a guitar player, singer, or stuff like that? So John Mayer follows, he loves Justin's, and he follows Justin's. And back in December, he sends a tweet to Justin's which says, "Cookie dough flavored almond butter, let's do it." That's in December. In February, it's probably hard to tell, this is almond butter and this is cookie dough kind of on the top. Justin actually created a cookie dough almond butter for John Mayer.
That's how it got so sweet. I got the wrong jar once. I'm like, this is so sweet.
Yeah. It's not possible because he only did 2 jars. So
One recently.
oh, that's interesting. I wonder, you should, do you still have it in your pantry? Yeah, you should. I'll give you my card and you should follow up with me on that, because maybe it's like vanilla almond butter or something like that. But so he did this, and what's so interesting about this is I think it's like 600,000 people tweeted about this. So if you think about, I mean, like this is, I don't know how many people here tweet, but it's a pretty big thing. Again, you know, if I had 230,000 people that are talking about bread, wow. You know, 600,000 people or whatever talking about, talk about catapulting your business. So what he did here from an innovation standpoint was you've got a high profile celebrity who loves your product. And so, in a big corporation, a lot of times they'd be like, we're not going to do cookie dough almond butter like that. That's not going to work on the line. So Justin literally, again, goes back to his garage and mixes all the stuff together and does that, and it really helps grow the business. So what about the results? Mudhava, the last few years has had double-digit sales growth. We doubled our business in 4 years. We went from a $35 million business to a $75 million business. Justin's, I can't reveal what their numbers are, but they've doubled their business in the last 2 years, and it is probably one of the biggest food success stories that you'll see, and I think a lot of it has to do with innovation. So as I kind of bring this to to home here, what can you do to instill the entrepreneurial spirit? I guess a couple things that I've said as with these 3 case studies. The first one is understand what it takes to win in your business. In each case study, I gave a little situation analysis. We said, what's the dilemma that we're dealing with? Understand, what your dilemma is and what it takes to win. I do think you need to have your dream team. When I say dream team, again, that's people that support your vision and what you want to do with the organization and believe that you can grow. The third is to not be afraid to take a chance. There's a lot of things, if I gave more stories about some of the decisions we made, it was about not being afraid about being risky. And even if you did, and supporting that in the culture for people not to be worried about failure. And then finally creating an environment where people get rewarded for their efforts. My last thought for you is this. I think a lot of entrepreneurs in my experience and a lot of us in our careers want to be a superhero. We want to try to do everything. That's kind of like who we are, and we want to be a jack of all trades, maybe and a master of none. And what I'd say is I think if you really want to create an entrepreneurial environment, make sure that you're tapping into the people that work for you, and that you're leveraging their strengths, and not as the leader trying to do it all. Because I think at the end of the day, when I think about my long career that I've had so far, some of it entrepreneurial, some of it big company, I feel like the root of my success is that people want to work for me, that I create an environment where they do feel like they can make a difference, that going back to my original diagram, that there is purpose in what they're doing. And what's so amazing is I think so many leaders get caught up in the numbers, and you forget that people create the numbers. And if you come back to the people piece, in my experience, the numbers always follow. So with that, thank you very much.